Today's Keys to the Commonwealth episode is brought to you by Nova Insurance. Are you a business owner or property manager in Kentucky or the surrounding states? Protecting your investment has never been more crucial. Nova Insurance specializes in commercial risk advising for your commercial business, as well as your commercial real estate and rental properties. With personalized service and expert advice, Nova Insurance ensures you are covered from every angle. Call 859-687-2004 today or visit them at novainsuranceGroup.com. Nova Insurance, securing your future one policy at a time. Now, today's episode. Landry Fields back with another episode of the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. Excited for today's episode where we are going to dive into a lot of what drives, I think, on just people in general, especially but business owners, and where we can go as far as leadership in businesses and just in general in our daily lives. So without further ado, going to introduce my longtime friend, I would say now, Jon Weece, to the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. Thanks for coming on, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Long time is legit.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you started playing piano when you were about 12. I'm sure it felt like that, baby-faced out there. Just
freshman in college, yeah. But yeah, so John, obviously you've been lead pastor at Southland for quite a while. But before we talk about that, I mean, how did you get to Lexington? Where are you from? Hop in the door in and tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, so from Columbia, Missouri originally. That's where born and raised. And came here to do an internship in 1996 and it kind of snowballed into a full-time staff position and didn't look back. Met my wife here. Raised my kids here, so I'm not.
It's always the girl, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you know Allison, so yes, I'm not.
Is there still some Mizzou stuff in the back of the closet somewhere?
No. So
I would have.
Dude, so the funny thing is, my brothers call me every time UK plays Mizzou, anything, and they're always black and gold, this and that, and I'm like, listen, that's like job suicide if I even mention that. But when I was a kid, yes, we were diehard Mizzou fans.
Well, at first it was fine. We didn't play them ever, but now,
and they're terrible.
The last couple of years, it's been. Yeah. So yeah, from Zoo, then internship, and then you arrived here at Lexington, and I think you became head pastor at Southland at age 20.
I was in my 20s.
Yeah. Which is wild. I'm sure thinking back at it now, you're like, what were you all thinking?
Yeah,
kind of thing, probably.
Still, and even what was I thinking? You know, my dad, my brothers were like, I don't know if you should do that.
Right.
So, yeah.
So obviously, you've been there for quite a while, since the mid-90s and stuff like that. So really, I wanted to kind of just dive into today, just a lot of stuff that's been, I've been kind of chewing on and contemplating in relations to both business leadership and getting some of your maybe wins or losses, as far as what you've experienced over the last almost 20 years now, 15 years or so. And then as well as far as just in general, some thoughts with the idea of like fear and how that plays into a lot of stuff we do with that. So before we do that, though, let's just start with the first part of it. And just in regards to leadership, I mean, there's a number of different ways we can go with that, but just in general, start with like what you've learned over the last few years. I mean, because I've kind of talked about it earlier with lately with a lot of people, and that it's kind of like parenting, and that like you can kind of like prepare all you want to be a parent, but really until you get into it, nothing really prepare. You still have to learn on the job in a lot of ways. And as a boss, and I'm in my 6th year of my business, I was like, no one really teaches you how to be a boss type of scenario in a lot of ways. And you find out a lot about yourself when you're put in that position too, and having to be honest with yourself about where your own faults are. So
yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think, you can only read so much. You can only go to so many conferences, listen to so many podcasts. Eventually you have to lead. And I think the most critical principle is every so often you have to turn around and see if anyone's following you. And there are some positions where you have authority because you've been given a title, but you never really want to actually lead from that position.
Sure.
You want to give people a reason to get behind you and follow you in whatever direction you're trying to take them. So, obviously clarity and knowing where your destination is, where you're trying to take people, but also knowing the kind of character that you're going to need to have. Because if you don't have that character, you won't be successful in any endeavor. So becoming the right kind of person will help you become the right kind of leader. And I always look at Jesus and say, more people follow Jesus than any other leader in human history. So whether you believe in him or not, there are principles to be taken from his life to help you become an effective leader. And first and foremost, he was humble.
Yeah.
You think he could have led with title, didn't ever play that, hey, I'm the son of God card. Instead, elevated the needs of others above his own wants, dreams, and desires. And people got behind him because he washed dirty feet. And you think about who he really is, and
that's a lot.
CEO of the universe in a lot of ways, at least in our, kind of belief system. But at the same time, didn't act like it.
Yeah.
And so that motivated people to get behind him. And genuinely, people knew he cared about them. And I think that's true in any organization. If you care about the people you work with, man, they'll do a lot with you, for you. And that's important.
Totally true. And a lot of that, and then within that respect, there's my own business, I contemplated what was everybody's got like a slogan with their businesses and so forth like that. And it took me a while, but ultimately I was like, you know what, I'm just going to come back to the fact of like within the insurance business, I'm just going to have to love people through insurance, whatever that looks like. As dumb as that may sound as far as a slogan,
great.
I was like, at the end of the day, really that's what it's supposed to be for. Always trying to do what's in the best interest of the client. And it could be whatever business you're in, obviously in that sense. But if we're doing that from a standpoint of loving our neighbor as ourselves, loving people the way and treating the people like the old adage, treating people like you would want to be treated. I mean, ultimately, we should never, sure, there's going to be problems that arise, but ultimately, it should be a lot easier of a battle to fight through in that sense than trying to always lead from and leading in that way, like you said, even with the staff I've got, obviously, in that sense, and always trying to be humble enough, thinking, hey, I'm going to make mistakes,
yes.
But I'm also, I want you to be comfortable enough to come to me and be able to kind of tell me whatever issue is going on. I'm not going to react that way. I'm going to treat you as a human being and not as like just somebody that I'm paying to do some kind of job for, which I obviously am. But
sure,
we're still all human at the end of the day, and I'm never going to come from a place that, like you said, is not pushing people, but hopefully leading people. I guess Patton idea of like the string, and pulling the string rather than trying to push the string never works. Type of scenario. So
I use the simple phrase: servants can go places kings can't.
Yeah,
and Jesus proved that. He was a king, but he acted like a servant. And I think if we have a servant leader mindset, you quoted maybe the most important leadership principle the world's ever known: do to others what you would want them to do to you.
Right.
It works in marriage exceptionally well. You don't need to read another book. If you just take that one verse and go,
true.
Man, I'm going to do this for my wife. Not what can I get from her, but what can I give to her?
Yeah.
Works in parenting, works in education, sports, business, any sector. That phrase, that truth, that principle applies very easily. But actually owning it and doing it's a whole nother ballgame because we're selfish.
We are selfish. And I was listening to a podcast the other day. We're talking about everybody falls into two categories, and you can look at history of and I forget what the two are, but in essence, it's more of a mentality of scarcity where I'm afraid that there's not enough of a resource or enough of this or that. And so you're always reacting and you're not loving people or doing things that way because you're like, well, if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it and take advantage of what I'm not doing type of scenario. And then the other is that all of it's connected. Even nature is all connected in regards to and spiritual as well type of scenarios. And then you start doing things from a scenario of like we're all connected as one being in a lot of ways, rather than more of an individualistic aspect of you versus me and and so forth. And you're like, man, but people are going to take advantage of that, of course. And I'm sure you more than anybody have seen that, and we do not need to get into any stories that I'm sure you have numerous of people taking advantage of that. But what have you learned along the way in that sense, as far as just the fact that obviously people are going to slap you on the second side of the face too if you offer it to them sometimes.
Yeah, a couple of things come to my mind. One, I always try to lead with grace and land with truth. I think those are the two clearest expressions of love. So when I'm leading anybody, or if I'm speaking to a group of people, I want people to know I care about them. And so I lead with that grace, even with my own kids. And eventually I'm going to get to the truth, because as a leader, we're not going to get anywhere if we don't eventually land on reality. So if that's your bottom line, if that's numbers from the month, whatever it is, eventually you got to get there. But if you're delivering hard truth, you want to be able to set it up in such a way that the person knows that they're valued and loved.
Yeah.
I think the other part of that is just asking people what they need. It's so easy in leadership to assume we know, but I like to just every day ask our team, hey, what do you need from me? Mm-hmm. What do you need from our elders? What do you it's easy to assume they know, but oftentimes the people that are following, they need clarity, and it's good to give them clarity, but it's also good to assume, hey, I need to ask because there may be some things I'm unaware of, or I have blind spots. And as a leader, you're not going to be able to see and know everything going on in the organization. Matter of fact, I think you're probably doing your job when you don't know everything going on because you've delegated well.
Yeah.
And I talk about that a lot. Don't just delegate responsibility, delegate authority. And that's a scary thing as a leader, because you want to micromanage sometimes, and you have this quality that you're after, and they may not have the same, eye for something. But it's really important to give responsibility, but also follow it up with authority. Hey, I'm not going to be in your world every day micromanaging what you're doing. And people did that for me in my 20s. Let me make mistakes. And that's the best teacher. Failure is the best teacher if we allow it to be. But you have to create that culture, that environment where it's safe to try risky things. And sometimes there's high reward and other times there's high failure.
I feel like we're living in a world, obviously, has become more and more where they try not to let anyone make mistakes or, in that sense. And like back to my own kids or your own kids, like I'm like, no, it's important for you to try and to make mistakes and take on responsibility yourself for things. And you learn a lot more about yourself through that, a lot more confidence about yourself going into adulthood and so forth.
You can't protect or hedge from all that. If you do, you're going to be spending your time on things you shouldn't be spending your time on as the point leader.
And I'm in the middle of now where I'm in that trying to figure out how to delegate, and I haven't delegated in some parts of responsibility. And that's a weird thing to kind of let go of, especially like for me, when I started my own agency, 6 years ago, where it's like, when it's just you, of course it wasn't just you, obviously, when you started that at Southland there, but when it's your baby kind of a scenario in some ways where like it was for me in doing that. So I'm in the middle of that too, trying to figure out where, how to delegate, but at the same time, still leading and not pushing type of scenario. And it's a hard balance, I would say. Like it's more like I kind of say it's more like a seesaw where it's hard to ever just stay at equilibrium between the two. Like usually there's always one side that's kind of pressing a little bit more than the other. And sometimes I've just discovered even today that sometimes maybe trying to include everybody as much where I'm not showing the leadership and the strength aspect that I already have internally doesn't always help either. If people are needing the leadership type of scenario where I'm almost trying to overcompensate and be like, what does everybody think here? Rather than saying, hey, here's the idea. Where do you think we can improve type of scenario? What do you need differently in this type of thing? And if you give them to them from scratch, so some kind of process, idea, et cetera, that's not always the best solution sometimes either.
Yeah. It's easy in our minds because things are clear and they're not always clear in other people's minds. So, when you get to a place of clarity, you can never over communicate.
Yeah.
And I say it to young communicators all the time. If it's a mist on stage, it's going to be a fog in the audience. And that's true with your team as well. Right. If you don't have clarity in your own mind, it's not going to be clear for your team. So the goal is figure out what your bullseye is and then aim everybody at that and over communicate. You can never communicate too much. But back to your original point there about growth. Yeah, growth is scary at times. You want it, but then when it comes, it brings change.
Yeah.
And so we talk about this dynamic or this tension in our organizational life of flexibility within the framework. So we've created this framework. Everybody knows the processes we're operating by on our team. But within that, there's flexibility because you want ingenuity, you want creativity, you want people bringing good ideas to the table. And if you don't give them that permission, then all the good ideas stay in the hearts and minds of the people you're probably leading. And then it puts more pressure on you as a leader.
Yeah.
Just release that and let people bring and brainstorm ideas with you. And eventually, probably out of every 99 ideas you have, one will be really, really good.
Right.
And that's
all you need.
That's all you need.
Sense. Yeah. I mean, and back to a lot of times, maybe entrepreneur, especially in this case, a lot of times you only need one idea to work before it kind of like makes sense and things start taking off. But back to kind of like this, taking the step out there, like we were talking about, and switching gears more into what we were talking about prior to the podcast, and something I've been kind of mulling, and the idea that, there's a scripture reference for it too, but I think there's an idea that we were created from a place of not of fear, but a place of power, of love, and self-control in that sense. And putting those three together, I've realized, especially I guess you could make the argument, technically that statement was made to a male who was trying to lead. So, but you could the young man. And so you could also take it in other ways as well. But contextually, it was more or less to a guy who's trying to lead in a certain area at that point in time. So I think there's a big reference there into just entrepreneurs or people who are business leading, have employees and so forth as well. And starting to internalize that myself, realizing that I need to be leading from that place of not of fear, realizing that I have the capabilities that, internally within me as well. But I don't have everything. I have to be honest with you. I don't have everything internally that I need. Sure, I still need counsel of people and so forth. But having confidence in what I already have been given and so forth like that, make mistakes. But also, if you're balancing that idea of like leading from a place of power, but at the same time loving in a loving way and in a self-controlled way, you almost get the superhero mindset of like some big, strong Hulk Thor person where they're like, but they only bring it out when they absolutely need to because they're really just there to help protect and and love and make and keep order type of scenario, but they garner respect and awe at the same time.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of crossover, I think, in that sense. And the back to the fear part, we talked about earlier before we started, just the idea that we're only born with the fear of, what was it? The two things that we're born with.
Falling and loud noises.
Loud noises and falling. Mm-hmm. And when you start thinking about that, I challenge everybody to think about that. We're only born with the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. If we can start trying to channel our brain back in, renewing our mind back into that mindset,
we learn
how much more. I feel like everything stems from that aspect of fear. We just do so much out of fear based upon things we were told as a kid, and that affected us into our adult lives. And the things we have to undo that we've kind of unfortunately learned and become afraid of, and then we don't do things that maybe we would like to do, or we don't talk to people we wish we would have talked to, and we leave things unsaid. We don't attempt something out maybe beyond what we think we're capable of within reason. You don't want to, but.
Yeah, when I was younger, I remember having, moments of being paralyzed by, I don't know if I can do this. When are people going to figure out that I'm not the real deal? You feel like a fraud when you're young because you don't have life experience and you're around people who are really capable and really successful. But what you don't realize is most older people want you to succeed. And sometimes it just requires humility to go and ask them to help. Mm-hmm. Hey, what did you do wrong that I can learn from? What did you do well that I can learn from? Those simple conversations are such a blessing, again, in any arena of your life. And I remember when I was young, I just had this phrase that played in my mind all the time. What I lack in life experience, I'm going to make up for with preparation. And so whether it was communicating from stage or being ready for a meeting, I was going to always be over prepared. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to waste people's time because I'm leading 40, 50, 60-year-old people. I'm in my 20s, and there's no way to fool them. They know I don't have life experience. They know I don't have wisdom. But I can bring a level of excellence to any conversation, be super prepared, not waste their time in such a way that they want to come back, and they begin to build trust with me. And over time, then you begin to accrue some life experience to go with your good ideas and your energy. Because when you're young, you have tons of energy, tons of enthusiasm.
You're going to change the world.
Yes, you just don't have the know-how to get stuff done and get it accomplished. But over time, you begin to accumulate that. And I think sometimes as we get older, we talk too much. I think it's still wise to minimize your words. Don't say a whole lot, especially when you're young, and only speak when you're prepared. Mm-hmm. You'll get put in positions, and it's okay to go, you know what, I'm not ready to talk about that yet, or I haven't had enough time to think that through. And that was my go-to phraseology I used in meetings, or when people would ask me questions, I go, give me a little bit more time, and I'll think about that, because I wanted to be as prepared as I possibly could in every situation.
Not the politician side where you'll never answer it. More just like I just got to get an answer and figure out what I really.
Yes, because everybody's coming to you wanting some kind of counsel, and you can't pretend. If you do, you'll lose credibility.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And that credibility, I was listening to that podcast too about that credibility and that power aspect is like, if you're able to be in the position of the one that's giving the grace or giving the forgiveness to somebody, how ultimately that's like the most powerful position that there is. And distinctly, this podcast was talking about more or less a guy who was in charge of going to Al-Qaeda leaders and trying to pursue into them their identity, and that their whole identity had been wrapped into this idea of different this is who you're supposed to hate. This is what you're supposed to do. And a lot of times they started getting back to what was driving the fear that had put them in that position and who their real identity was. And, and he was more of obviously a faith-based aspect from it, but he was hired by, the top level 3-letter agencies, even though they didn't really love it, but they were like, this is working. Yeah. And it was like going back to your identity of like who you are really at the end of the day changed everything, and undoing those fears of what you were afraid of in that point. And so it's a lot. I mean, I feel like it's a lifetime of unlearning. Sure. In some ways.
And it's easier sometimes to give forgiveness to others than to forgive yourself. And
that's a great point.
You're going to make mistakes as a leader. You just are. And I'm surrounded by really forgiving people. I've made a ton of mistakes in the position I'm in. People have extended a ton of grace to me. If they've done that for me, they're going to do it for you as well. So I think if you're a young leader listening to this, it's important just to remember you're going to make them. And when you do, sometimes again, it's easier to forgive other people, but you need to work at being able to forgive yourself so that you don't get, to a place where you're absolutely crippled by that fear. Because fear can be a devastating thing in the heart or mind. It's a corrosive feature in life.
We usually talk worse to ourselves than we talk to anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And Satan loves to plant lies in our head and make us believe things that just aren't true.
And then back to that point about just gaining knowledge and understanding and how to handle situations or for learning from other people's mistakes. I think I was shocked to see how many people that I could go to that were so willing, that had been through those life experiences to actually, I'm going to have a conversation with you, sit down, hey, call me anytime type of scenario.
Very open-handed.
And if I'm being vulnerable or even as a leader of things I've been, once you've been through it and had gone through things, it feels like people are more willing to be vulnerable to say, hey, let me try and impart this onto you that you haven't been through yet, but it's coming or you might experience.
Yeah. So, initially we talked about humility, and servants can go places kings can. I think the other aspect there is gratitude. When you're getting good counsel, you're getting wisdom from an established leader, someone sharing, from the overflow of their experiences, gratitude will get you a long way with them. Mm-hmm. You need to just express gratitude. Hey, thank you for sharing that with me. I know I don't deserve that, but man, appreciate handwritten notes, quick text message. Gratitude will open doors and keep doors open for you in life, and people know. They're a whole lot more likely to share stuff with you, coach you, come alongside of you if they know you're genuinely grateful. And so I'd say that's an important part of any leadership position you're in. That unexpressed gratitude is really a form of ingratitude. So if you're not saying to someone on a regular basis, hey, I'm so thankful, Jon or Tim, I'm thankful for what you do and what you bring to the table, people burn out and they get resentful towards you. And that's true for people who are sharing advice with you as well. Yeah. They'll eventually turn that valve off and you won't get stuff from
That's actually funny you say that, because I remember hearing something years ago, and I've implemented it pretty much from day one, but as simple as like even with staff and so forth, of just simple like high fives, like just the idea of touch, obviously appropriate scenarios, but like it's kind of a way of like, great job, I see what you're doing type of scenario.
Yes.
And responding to how, I'm excited for what they've just accomplished or whatever type of thing. And so I've tried to do that early on and like.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of younger leaders too, who might be under you, at some point you got to, give back. Don't forget what it was like to be in their shoes. I see that. We don't want to box people in the culture we're creating at Southland, but we want them to see, hey, there's an opportunity for you to continue to grow and, move up the proverbial ladder, if you will. Once people feel hemmed in, they're gonna leave. Yeah. And sometimes leaders need to leave. Like there is a ceiling or there is a lid to their development in your business or in the church. And so, when they hit that, you need to say, hey, the frustration you're feeling is natural. I tell young leaders all the time, if you're questioning the status quo, thinking, man, I could do this better, that's not a bad quality. That's a great quality. Yeah. It may be that you need to go flex your muscles somewhere else. This may be too small of an environment for you. So, man, we're going to set you free to go do that. And that's a scary moment for them. But I think for a lot of young leaders that I've seen who are really dynamic and really solid at what they're doing, their potential is really, really high. And there's only so much ceiling for them to maximize under the umbrella of Southland. So we try to set them free. You're
trying to lead from love and grace, and why wouldn't I want them to go spread their wings if there's something they can do something better or somewhere else? Or, hey, and I've always said that with I'm going to make it just like every client for me. So like one of my mottos is I'm going to make it as easy for you to walk into the door here at my agency as it will be to walk out the door. Mm-hmm. And that should be from a place of love. I'm doing that in that sense and not sitting here being like, well, you said this, or how dare you type of scenario. But the same way with the staff too, I would want to held to that same regard, that same concept.
Insecurity is a dangerous thing in any person's heart.
Probably tied back to fear.
Yeah, it's definitely tied back to fear. And I think you just have to be careful of making decisions out of insecurity. It's a very selfish place to live, especially if you do have responsibility to people, under you. Yeah. And you got to think about their best interest. And if it's your insecurity, then you're threatened by other people's success, or you're threatened by other people's, accomplishments, or man, they're getting a lot of attention, I'm not. You see that a lot in leaders. These really capable, really dynamic people can be deathly insecure, and that's their Achilles heel. In a lot of ways. You got to be very careful about that.
And I may have actually heard this from you, but it's a common quote that's out there, and we're going to put it on the wall in here. But the idea from Henry Ford: if you think you can, or if you think you can't, you're right.
You're right. Yeah.
And that's such a powerful statement when you think about it and internalize that statement.
The greatest gift that God gave us is between our ears. I mean, we have a powerful engine in our brains. And when we allow different parts of our brain to be open up to creativity, and it's fascinating what we're capable of doing.
Right.
But oftentimes fear, insecurity, these are the things that limit us.
For sure. And then I think the last part I want to touch back on is in still regards to fear, but obviously we've seen it where, in some ways we were talking a little bit with just technology and where it's going. And a lot of times it can have a fear with that, but I think you can probably agree that we've seen an idea, especially I have a heart for obviously that next generation or my kids' generation. And that it seems like fear is becoming more and more, especially in our first world country that we live in currently, just more and more prevalent than it's ever been. And maybe it's different than it was. Maybe it's always been in some form or fashion. I don't know. I don't want to say for sure, but I mean, it's a massive aspect of just as you see, this idea of anxiety has skyrocketed from where it used to be. And I mean, what are your thoughts on these? Because it's a tough topic. I don't really, I kind of have a solution, but ultimately I can't go to every single person and try to have that conversation, but it's just my inner circles that I have trying to do what I can.
Generationally, I think there's something to that. I think social media has exacerbated that problem. And I think a lot of people are anxious, fearful, worried because they know they're living a fraudulent life. You can't hide from yourself, and you really can't hide from other people. So at some point, it's just good to admit, I don't have skills and I need to develop skills. Someone said, as far as generations, your generation has had access to all this information on the internet. So you can YouTube anything, you can figure out how to change a tire, tie a tie, all this stuff. But actually doing it, it's one thing. So you feel like you're an expert on everything, but really not a master at anything. And that creates insecurity and fear in the heart. So I always tell younger leaders, develop real life skills. Go try stuff and give yourself permission to fail. I think because of social media, there's this perfectionistic, bar that's been set for you guys, maybe even self-imposed, that the rest of us aren't holding you to. Like I'm expecting you to mess up, and I'm not going to lose sleep over that. But I think for yourself, you got to get past that and go, man, I just need to go try some things. And so, as a young leader, it's so important that you develop skills, and that's just going to take some time. But once you have those skills, you'll feel a little bit stronger and do things that are really, really hard. If that's physically, set a goal and go run a half marathon. And all of a sudden you'll feel like, I got a little steel in my spine. Yeah, I'm capable of doing things that I didn't think I was capable of. And again, that fraudulent feeling will begin to dissipate. But that only comes through experience. So you got to put yourself in situations. Go on a mission trip where it's uncomfortable. Have difficult conversations with people. You'll be surprised at how resilient you are and what you're actually capable of. But until you put yourself out there and try things, again, you're going to feel like a fraud. Yeah.
And I think experience comes hand in hand with scars, because whether those are big scars or small scars, it's just, that's what creates experience, I think. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I'm covered in them.
But do you find yourself in that more what you're, again, like you said, what you're capable of and what you're, that's not really going to hurt me at the end of the day type of scenario. Sure. It doesn't have to define me.
And instinctively, you're capable of doing things that you don't even realize you're capable of. I tell a lot of young people, get married and have kids. Okay.
That's becoming, I think, a little bit more popular again.
Wonderfully so, because you know this from experience. There's no greater teacher than marriage and parenting. Yeah. Nothing. No. Nothing at all. And parenting especially, it forces you to address your selfishness. Yeah. And if you really lean into it, man, you'll grow up really fast. And so God's design is the best design, and I think He designed us to get married and have kids. And sometimes we put that on the back burner and we wait too long. And that's the ultimate classroom experience that will accelerate your maturity. In a way that nothing else will.
Yeah. I mean, 100%.
It's not popular.
100%.
Not popular, but it's effective.
One of the things real quick there too, that gives me a little hope as far as the social media stuff, especially as your kids are more college age, mine are still years before that. But I think I see, and I agree with the guy that kind of talked about this, Gary Vee, if you know who that is or not, where he was talking about the idea of like authenticity. And how so much of it has, I think there's a spirit of like, especially younger people who have been, they're just trying, they're starved for what is real and what is true type of scenario, and not what is fake or on the surface type of scenario. And because of that, an idea of social media aspect of, if anything, hopefully becoming where they're starting to be drawn with more of like just the authenticity aspect of like, I messed this up, I failed, this is what I really look like. And so for like that, and I'm hoping that starts becoming more of a trend of like, no, this really is me at the end of the day, or this is. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, follow along to know that you're not alone in this situation.
Absolutely, and I think previous generations were more comfortable in their own skin because, again, they developed some skills that were really practical. Yeah. So you look at someone like my granddad, didn't have a college education, but he was skilled. And, there was a resolve in him, and his chest could stick out a little bit because he could fix things, build things, grow things. So I tell young people all the time, just develop a new skill every year. Add one new skill to your tool belt. And by the time you're 30, you're going to be surprised at how capable you are. And it's just going to put you on a launch pad towards a better life, a greater life. And you'll sleep better at night too. You won't feel like a fraud.
Right. I would say greater life being more of a fulfilled life.
Yes.
I guess that was one at the end of the day. Well, I think we'll probably wrap it up like that, unless you got any parting statements or anything like that.
No, thanks for having me. It's been
good. By all means, check out Southland if so inclined. If not, we will see everybody back here in a couple of weeks on another episode of the Keys to Commonwealth podcast. Jon, thanks for coming.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks.
To learn more about this podcast, visit our page at keystothecommonwealth.com. To connect with Landry regarding insuring your investment portfolio, email Landry at novainsuranceGroup.com or call 859-687-2004.